Good morning. Hi, Joe. If you take your seats, get some coffee, some nourishment for the provocative panel we're about to have. Good morning, all. I'm glad you came back. I take that as a sign that you're voting with your feet and you enjoyed last night. Thank you to all the panelists from last night that are with us this morning. I thought it was a really good start to a series of conversations about leadership in these difficult, uncertain, but exciting times. This morning, we're going to look at philanthropy, where it's been, where it is, and where it might be heading. And we're very fortunate to have Jim Canales, who is the president of the James Irvine Foundation, which is headquartered in San Francisco, but Jim spends a lot of time not only in Los Angeles, but traveling the state. So we're glad that he's here this morning to moderate this distinguished set of panelists who are largely observers, commentators, and thought leaders in the field. And so I'm going to hand it over to Jim.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim, and good morning. Can you hear me? Is the mic on? I have turned it on, but maybe the folks back there can do whatever they need to do to... And maybe while they're doing that, I may just go up here to kick us off. And if I have to stay up here, I guess it's not the end of the world. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see everyone, and like Jim, I would invite you to continue to nourish yourself. There's plenty of food in the back, and it's nice to see everyone so early this morning. As Jim noted, what we are seeking to do this morning is to really build on some of the themes that were introduced in the panel last evening, which, as you know, focused on some of the challenges and opportunities that we see for the sector in view of the environment that we find ourselves in. Yesterday's panel, as you know, included representatives from the corporate sector, from government, from the nonprofit sector, and from philanthropy. And this morning, we're really going to focus much more specifically on philanthropy's role in this environment. And we have with us four distinguished panelists, thought leaders, and commentators on philanthropy. And we're really therefore going to focus just on the role of the philanthropic sector. Let me briefly introduce each of the panelists, and you have biographical material, so I'm not going to go into extensive detail, but let me just start down at the far right, no pun intended. We have Bill Shambra, who is, as many of you know, the director of the Hudson Institute's Bradley Center for Philanthropy and Civic Renewal. And prior to joining Bradley in 2003, Bill was the director of programs at the Bradley Foundation. He has also held a wide range of positions in the government sector, and he, as many of you know, he is really among one of the more thoughtful commentators on the state of philanthropy, as well as issues of civic revitalization and civic renewal. Immediately next to Bill is Sean Stannard Stockton. Sean is the CEO of Tactical Philanthropy Advisors, which is a philanthropy advisory firm that works with both individual and family philanthropies. He's also the author of the Tactical Philanthropy blog, which many of you know, if you are in the blogosphere, is among one of the more well-read and also thoughtful blogs on the state of philanthropy today. And Sean gets a great deal of credit for getting that up and running as he has. And as a result of that, he is now has a monthly column in the Chronicle of Philanthropy and actually appears in a number of other periodicals as well. Next to Sean is Stacy Palmer. Stacy is the editor of the Chronicle of Philanthropy and has served in that lead editorial role since 1988, and has also overseen the development of the Chronicle's movement into Web 2.0 with the websites philanthropy.com and philanthropycareers.com. And in fact, if I can put a plug in for philanthropy.com, I believe you've got a beta site that you have just launched, so you're about to revitalize and refresh that terrific source of information. Prior to joining the Chronicle of Philanthropy, Stacy was also the editor for government and politics at the Chronicle of Higher Education. And next to Stacy is Ralph Smith, who is Executive Vice President of the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Ralph has been with Casey since 1994 in a variety of roles, and prior to joining Casey, he was on the law faculty at the University of Pennsylvania, where he taught corporation, securities regulation, and education law and policy. In addition, and relevant to our panel today, among many of Ralph's community engagements, he currently serves as chair of the board of directors of the Council on Foundations. So he brings certainly that perspective to us. What unites these individuals is that they are among the most thoughtful and respected commentators on the state of philanthropy today. What does not unite them, however, is the way that they look at these issues. And so I think as a result, you're going to be in for a very lively and provocative exchange. Our format today is intended to be more conversational in nature, so I'm not going to ask each of them to make 7-minute introductory comments in a serial nature. Rather, I'm going to pose some questions directed at one of the panelists and then really invite the other panelists to weigh in based on the response. And we'll just sort of keep rolling down that path until you've heard from everybody. And then I've got a few other questions that I'd like to pose. And then as we did last evening, we will want to open it up to questions that you might have. So with that, let's jump in. And let me start actually with Stacy. And let me bring the one prop that I have today. Many of you may have seen the Chronicle's, I believe, most recent issue, the January 14th issue, which was entitled "The Future Starts Now." And this was really a piece on what should the nonprofit and philanthropic sector be thinking about as we look to the year 2020. So I thought it would be useful to start with Stacy because obviously she's been thinking a great deal about some of the trends and forces facing our sector, and that might be a good grounding for the conversation. So Stacy, let me turn it to you to comment on some of those trends.
Thank you. So, what I was starting to say is that one of the things that was very striking to me when we did this report, actually, is that it seems very hard to get people to think about what is going to happen in 2020 and to think broadly about the way the world is changing and how philanthropy will be affected. And so I preface my remarks with that because I think it's a challenge to the people in this room to start thinking about some of the things that are really going to come down on this field in a very big way and how it needs to change. And clearly this economic crisis has paralyzed a lot of the thinking for a while, but we need to get past that in some kind of a way and be more thoughtful about the kinds of ways in which nonprofits, foundations, and everybody who is serving the common good thinks about the world. So we did talk to a number of people for their ideas just to see what are the trends that foundations and nonprofits need to be preparing for. And none of them will shock you, but it will give you a context of some of the things that I think we all ought to be thinking a lot more about. Obviously, one of the first ones is the graying of America, which is, as more and more of us are getting older, we're just going to be in lots bigger numbers. And we all know that. We've known that for a long time, but we've been slow to deal with it. The number of people who can be enlisted as volunteers and as donors is going to grow in interesting ways that are going to be very different. We haven't fully tapped that. One of the things Steve Gunderson told us, the head of the Council on Foundation, is what keeps him awake at night is that there just aren't enough community foundations, other organizations to be able to absorb some of that transfer of wealth in the areas where it's needed. So, I feel like at the Chronicle we've been writing about that pretty much for the 20 years that we've existed, that people are worrying about these things, but they're not changing fast enough, and people aren't doing enough kinds of things. So clearly paying attention to what these trends mean is hugely important. Global philanthropy and the way in which that's going to change is another big trend that everybody needs to get used to, and that's moving very, very quickly. And we see that changing in lots of different ways as wealth is shifting, and it's in lots of different places, and there's really a burgeoning of new philanthropy in so many places, and hopefully a reinvention in some ways that we can all learn from in different ways. At the same time that it's very exciting to see philanthropy in different parts of the world, we're going to need more of it than ever in various places. In large part as things like climate change affect not just the environment, but the lives of the people in countries affected by these things. We're going to all need to change how we do things and how we think about them and how we work together. Part of what will change that is technology, which is the other thing people talked about. And what really shocked me was that people could not get very far in thinking about in 2020 how will philanthropy use technology in new ways, because I think every day now we're looking at new ways to use things. So clearly everyone will be using mobile devices and doing things in different ways. How that changes the dynamic of people exchanging information, asking questions about philanthropy, that could be pretty dramatic. And I think we've already seen some of the changes, but philanthropy hasn't necessarily responded to all of them so well. Hopefully in the next 10 years or so, we'll see more of that. Another trend that's probably extremely clear here in California, but will be much more so across the country, is the growing influence of Hispanics and getting them involved in the philanthropic world in a bigger way than they have been so far, because clearly we're getting to the point where America soon will be a place that people who we think of now as minorities will be in the majority. Philanthropy hasn't done so well on that score either necessarily in terms of incorporating new people, especially getting people to volunteer and give in new ways. It certainly happens, but it hasn't happened as systematically. That's changing and needs to change in a very big way. And then lastly, the big thing that people were pointing out is something that we see a lot of and is certainly going to happen. Will the idea of charity itself just disappear? Will there be 501c3s? Do we need them anymore? Could they perhaps go out of business because business decides that it's going to be more concerned with dealing with social change and social problems, and that government acts in a new way? It's possible that we won't use these old systems, that people will join together in new ways, joined by technology in part, to come about and bring about new sorts of changes and work together in completely different ways than we thought of before. And we may think about business playing much more role. We see young people much more attracted to those kinds of organizations, and that we really need to rethink how that all works. There's going to be a big shakeout when that kind of thing happens. And we talked about some of those things last night when we were talking about the Social Innovation Fund and some of the things that are going to happen there. But there's it's working. Okay. I'm going to try to keep going. Those were the main trends that people talked about, but then there were a bunch of other ideas when we said to people, okay, so but what else do you really think is going to happen? The biggest concern, of course, is what's happening to states because of the budget crisis and that whole sort of what the National Governors Association calls the lost decade. That's going to happen as needs mount up because we can't deal with so many of the things that are happening right now because of budget deficits. It's not about closing the gap this year or next year, as we all know. It's a big shakeup that's going to cause really a giant change in the way we think about how we do things, and it's going to be very long lasting. So that's going to reshape philanthropy in dramatic ways. Then there are other things too. The obesity epidemic. By 2015, some people say 75% of adults in America will be obese. That's a huge number and something that we have in our power to stop if we focus on those things. The wealth inequality, trying to change some of those things. 10% of the world population owns 85% of the assets. Religion, another area in which there's tremendous change. 28% of people have left the religion of their birth in recent years and gone on to do new things. That changes their giving patterns, it changes the causes they affiliate with, it changes all kinds of things that we think about in philanthropic impulses because religion is clearly such a key part of it. So those are some of the kinds of changes that we all need to find ways to grapple with. And I haven't talked about things like capacity building and all that sort of stuff because I think what we really need to focus on, what are the issues and how do we change in various ways. I think sometimes in philanthropy we get caught up in sort of the how we do it, and in some ways we really need to focus on what are the issues that change the world and how do we respond to them. So I hope that's part of what we can talk about.
Great. Thank you very much. Oh, it sounds like it appears that this is now working. Can we just do a quick test, Bill? You put it away. Sean, are you okay?
Am I on?
There you are. Great. Ralph? Ralph's on? Stacy, you'll probably be back on, so here we are. Thank you. Stacy, thanks very much. And I think one of the places I might want to take the conversation based on that very broad set of trends that Stacy just articulated is to pick up on something Stacy said, a phrase actually that she used, which is philanthropy's capacity to respond to these trends. And I might ask the panelists to sort of weigh in on the thought, now that Stacy's laid out what these broad trends are, the need to really be attentive to them, what are your views about philanthropy's ability, willingness, and capacity to actually respond to what we've just heard?
I think that's the big trick. It's actually easier to predict the future of the world versus how philanthropy will participate. I mean, imagine it was 10 years ago, and the center here was just beginning. And that would have been January of 2000. The NASDAQ bubble would have been 6 weeks from popping. And if you sat there and tried to predict the future, and you were perfect, and you predicted Facebook and Twitter and information technology and the financial crisis, I don't know if you would have also probably thought, and foundations and philanthropy will embrace all of that and use these information tools. So the rise of the social web, which is about participation and social interaction, is ideally suited to the civic field, to philanthropy. you would assume that philanthropy would have participated and used those tools. But I'd suggest that philanthropy, especially foundations, have basically been absent from that trend. And so when you lay out very well the demographic changes, how will philanthropy change? A lot of other sectors are forced to change, right? Because if they don't, they go out of business. And I think it's a great gift in many ways that philanthropy can resist that. They have the ability to not engage where the trends are going if they think it's not the right thing to do. And yet they're also not forced to change. And so I wonder, what will happen over the next 10 years? I think that what you've laid out is a very accurate depiction, but I worry that philanthropy, especially as defined by foundations, won't change all that much. Because I can't say they've changed all that much over the past 10 years.
And Sean, just to stay with you for a moment, what do you see as some of the impediments for that create the situation that you've just described?
I think it's mostly self-imposed constraints. I think that the majority of ways in which foundations and philanthropy do not change are because they choose not to, and often think that they can't for some reason. But to a very large extent, it's self-imposed. I think that's one of the wonderful things about our sector is the ability to go out and do new things. I've talked a lot about failure in philanthropy, but it's almost kind of a joke to really call that, because if you're a foundation, you go out and you totally fail at something, the worst that happens is people say, that wasn't very good. And you say, screw you. I mean, what are they going to do? You're not going to go to business, right? I mean, you just keep doing whatever you want to do. So, I think that to the extent that people don't embrace changes because they just choose not to. And that's a good thing that philanthropy can choose not to change and choose not to, get sucked up in the financial crisis, for instance. I mean, financial institutions in many ways were forced to get caught up in the crisis. Their shareholders were demanding that they start embracing, riskier loans and taking on more risk in their portfolios. And people would have gotten fired if they hadn't gone along with it. And philanthropy can stand apart from that. That's a good thing. It also means you can just stand around and not embrace change.
Bill?
Jim, a lot of the problems that Sean refers to here, we're sort of aggravating that through focus on things like strategic philanthropy, bearing down on very clearly defined objectives to which we attach clearly delineated outcome measures. And everything we hear in the field today is that you make your plan and you stick with it. You really do bear down and you forecast long term and you stick with those plans. And as we well know, this sector in particular is able to insulate itself, and for all the reasons that Sean was talking about, is particularly able to insulate itself from the changes that Stacy described. Curiously, we're sitting, philanthropy is part of a larger entity called civil society. And if any sector in American political history has been adapted, it's been civil society. Always, everywhere, in neighborhoods and cities and rural areas across America, people are figuring out the answers, right, to these trends that Stacy's describing. Within civil society, people stepping forward to solve these problems, and yet foundations are increasingly critical of those who merely respond to people coming through the door. That's now, passé. We have to define our own mission and pursue it, and that I think is a serious problem.
Yeah. Ralph, any thoughts on this subject?
I begin by being somewhat reticent to talk about philanthropy. Let's try again.
Can you hear me now? I would say that I really am reticent to talk about philanthropy at large, because those of us who are in philanthropy probably could say, like it was Rob Rogers who said that he wasn't a member of an organized political party because he was a Democrat. Well, we're now a member of an organized industry because we're in philanthropy. And, you know, within philanthropy, there's much variation in size and focus and accomplishments and spirit between philanthropy and anything. But, you know, I think there is a criticism that is probably merited if you single out a relatively small group of foundations, but that, you know, that we're not agile enough to be sufficiently responsive to the challenges of the times in which we live. That's a fair criticism. But when we look at the list, we find that this issue of the graying of America and the potential for the emergence of new philanthropy suggests to us that philanthropy is going to be, it's going to continue to be fairly pluralistic. You know, the rich may be different from the rest of us, that's what I hear, but they're not homogenous. They bring to the table different experiences and different values and different priorities, so we can expect that philanthropy is going to continue to be pretty pluralistic in its outlook. So how then do you engage the problem? Well, one, you've got to put philanthropy within a context and, you know, say that a political environment that is now a permanent campaign, where partisanship and ideological divides trump serious discussions of how to solve problems. And to ask philanthropy somehow to be at the forefront of solutions with be the head of a parade when nobody's following is a really tough way to go. So here are a couple of ways. If philanthropy sort of recognizes that its role puts it at an intersection of the public, the private, and the social sectors, you can see philanthropy continuing to accelerate its work with the public sector, trying to see whether we can figure out how to use what philanthropy knows, what it can garner from the rest of the sector to spot solutions and to try to scale them. You can see philanthropy working with the private sector to figure out how to make markets work and create business models that can develop a whole set of new products, invest in a whole set of new ways to bring products to scale. And you've seen it happening in the fresh food financing area, dealing with the issue of food deserts and hunger. And you can see philanthropy really begin to work with the not-for-profit sector to respond to that fiscal crisis. You know, Newt Gingrich calls what's happening in state and local government the next bubble. And he's probably right that there's a sort of a quiet crisis going on in the not-for-profit sector, especially those folks who depend on fees for service from the public sector as a significant part of their budget. Over the next decade, there is a disaster waiting to happen. And philanthropy, I think, has a role in anticipating that and working to restructure the sector in such a way that more folks have sustainable business plans, to shrink the number of nonprofits so that we get more efficient use of the dollars we have, and to find ways to help people to find other careers, which will mean dealing with the retirement insecurity that now pervades the social sector. As I look around this room, there are enough folks with hair like mine to know that we have got peers who spent their entire careers, 25, 30, 40 years, working in the social sector and can't afford to retire. And that retirement insecurity is a significant drag on the sector. It's a significant drag on performance. It's significant in terms of dealing with issues of succession and transition. I say all that to suggest that I don't want to be defensive about philanthropy being agile and looking backward and saying we've done all that we could have done, even most that we should have in the past decade. I think immediately ahead of us there are some serious problems that deeply implicated in the trend just outlined, and we've got to get on about the business of identifying those problems, meeting those challenges, and finding solutions. And the last thing I'll say is that when you begin to focus on solutions, philanthropy becomes sector agnostic. And that agnosticism is going to provoke enormous concern within the not-for-profit community, because philanthropy will have to work with government on solutions, we'll have to work with private sector on solutions and co-invest with the private sector, and we'll have to work with the not-for-profit sector. And when we stop, when we move from monogamy to agnosticism, that is going to evoke within the nonprofit or the social sector a significant concern, because they will sense a significant challenge, and in some cases significant threat.
Ralph, very thoughtful comments, and in fact, they're comments that obviously invite us to really think about philanthropy's role in a much broader environment and sort of in the broad sweep of what's happening politically. And on that front, in Monday's New York Times, I don't know if any of you saw David Brooks's article, which was about new populism in America. And much of the discussion of populism, the new populism, however you want to characterize it, is often about how that populism is directed at either the public sector, at government, or directed at big business, at the private sector. Not much has been said or written about how any of that populism is or should be directed at philanthropy. And I know that Bill Sember has given some thought to this subject, and I want to invite him to complicate some of our thinking with his thoughts on this subject.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's safe to say now, after 4 years of national elections, that America is in fact in the grips of a new populist insurgency, and it spans the political spectrum. It seems to be an insurgency against the big institutions of all sorts. Big corporations and big banks are in disrepute with some voters. Big government and big plans for its expansion are in disrepute with other voters. And throughout American history, whenever, and this begins with the Walsh Commission on Industrial Relations in 1912, continuing through the congressional investigations of Representatives Cox, Reese, and Patman in the 50s and 60s. Whenever the populist gale is blowing in America, sooner or later it blows ill for the world's philanthropy. I'm afraid over the past decade or so, philanthropy has set itself up to be severely buffeted by the storms of American populism. That's because it's not only gotten to be very big, but it also relishes and proclaims its bigness in a way sure to aggravate populist sensibilities of both the right and the left. Consider the title of one very recent popular book by Matthew Bishop and Michael Green, Philanthrocapitalism, How the Rich Can Save the World. That was the first edition, I understand. It's changed today because it's hard to imagine a title more likely to inflame populist resentments. The book celebrates a long trend thought to be very good news for philanthropy, namely the influx of a new wave of very wealthy entrepreneurs who are bringing cutting-edge techniques of business management into the supposedly slipshod and amateurish world of nonprofits. Even more established foundations, as you know, are adopting or ordering their grantees to adopt the business plans, benchmarks, metrics, and sometimes even the revenue-generating techniques of the marketplace. So at the precise moment that big business is in bad odor with the American people, foundations and their grantees are themselves deliberately becoming more like big business, adopting the very metrics-obsessed approach that did so little to prevent and may in fact even have helped to precipitate today's recession. Consider another trend likely to promote populist animosity. The foundations and nonprofits today are becoming ever more enthusiastic about working with and mimicking big government. Indeed, many nonprofits today are already virtually indistinguishable from agencies of big government because they're so beholden to government for funding, and they're anxious to become even more so. Often at the urging of foundations, nonprofits are turning ever more to advocacy, which in spite of the abstract value-neutral terminology, invariably means advocacy for sustained or increased government funding for programs. To cover the cost of those programs, some in the nonprofit sector are honest enough to admit it's going to be necessary to raise the public's taxes, and they're actually coming out in favor of that. The problem, though, is that nonprofits are less and less likely to benefit from the increases in government taxing and spending they see, even if they can't be squeezed from hard-pressed and resentful taxpayers. As state governments across the nation, we've just been talking about this, as state governments across the nation are discovering ever larger and less sustainable portions of their budgets are devoted to extremely generous salaries, benefits, and pensions for current and retired public service employees. This inevitably siphons off funding from worthwhile nonprofit programs. The governor of California noted recently that this year alone, some $3 billion was diverted to pension costs from other programs. So the nonprofit sector may have the best of intentions for its hard-pressed clientele as it advocates for larger government, but it will in fact simply be serving as the tax collector for government labor unions. Further sealing the relationship between big government and philanthropy, many of the nation's leading foundations are pushing forward into substantial new partnerships with government in education and health welfare. They're overjoyed that at last all those demonstration projects they've funded through the many lean, mean-spirited years can be pumped full of federal dollars and replicated across the country. However cozy foundations and nonprofits may wish to become with big government, the fact is that provokes even more vigorous populist resentment than big business. The surveys show that the public's trust in government is lower than ever, and sinks lower yet with each new major proposal for its expansion. Particularly as concern with public deficits mount, it would be difficult to find a position more likely to grate on populist nerves than advocacy for yet more taxing and spending. And yet this is the cause to which American philanthropy seems to be drawn. Ironically, even as foundations and their grantees pride themselves on becoming ever larger, more sophisticated, more business-like, or more government-like, the American people still understand this to be somehow the charitable sector, a word that makes its leaders squirm. Here in the public view, everyday citizens respond in a neighborly fashion to meet immediate needs and organize to solve their own problems. Even as citizens fume against big institutions, they're still willing to write a check for Haiti, the relief of Haiti, or the community senior center around the corner. This humble and homely view of the charitable sector can create problems for its larger institutions as administrative costs and salaries approach levels considered appropriate for all large and sophisticated institutions. That's why so many nonprofit scholars today are busy explaining to the American people that it's no longer your father's or your mother's charitable sector. Neighborliness and local civic activism are nothing more than naive Tocquevillian illusions about a mythical past, having nothing to do with the massive gleaming institutions so admirably like government and business that are at the heart of today's nonprofit sector. That Americans still feel warmly toward and participate willingly in the sector's activities testifies to the failure of its leaders so far to persuade us that nonprofit institutions should be regarded just like any other big institution. For a while at least, the stubborn persistence of this quaint romantic myth about charity, which was working so hard to reform and dispel, may spare big foundations and nonprofits from the populist discontent with bigness wherever it's to be found. It would be far wiser, I think, for our sector's leaders to appreciate and embrace the public sphere, however unsophisticated it may seem, that indeed philanthropy is part of and vital support for everyday civic institutions. To do that, it would be necessary for foundations to devote far more time and resources toward supporting civic engagement and local community activism, rather than vitiating those impulses with technocratic business-like procedures. It would be necessary for foundations and nonprofits to stand as sentinels against, rather than as silent and acquiescent partners in, the wasteful and inhumane practices of corporations and government who've done so much to promote propaganda. In other words, it may yet be possible for philanthropy to contribute to and help define the populist energies surging across America rather than falling victim to.
Bill, you give us so little to react to.
How many people here are primarily an individual donor, not involved in professional philanthropy? So, four people. I think another way to think about populism, right, is in the engagement with everybody, right? Engagement with individuals. Individual donors give 85% of charitable donations every year. And so while populism is directed at corporations, especially the banks or government, at tearing them apart or saying, we want to stop what they're doing. And it can actually be forced. If the banks are changing their behavior, even though well, their lots of rules have changed, but they're changing their behavior despite rules. So they're cutting back pay, even though there hasn't been a lot of rules yet when they've changed their pay structure, because they're saying that people are telling us we have to do this and we have to be in their good graces. Now, philanthropy can, of course, have the rules changed, right? In terms of deductions be taken away, foundations have constraints on them. But that's a pretty apocalyptic scenario. That's a real rising of individuals to say, you're worthless. And I think that's not going to happen. You can turn the whole question around and say, what is the opportunity for philanthropy to harness this energy of the individuals who are interested in building a better world? That's what populism is directed at. Individuals rising up and saying, we don't like the system the way it is. We want it to be different. Philanthropy can harness that, but not if they don't invite individual donors into the room, right? So I think that is the key opportunity for philanthropy writ large, is to capture and influence the attention and interest of individual donors and help channel it, not necessarily into the traditional way of the strategic projects, but in ways that, say, like the Case Foundation has been doing, which is actively looking at how can we engage individual donors and help them give more effectively, not necessarily into our preset plans, but into the ways that they want to give themselves.
Let's just stick on this point of individual donors. Stacey, we'd love to hear your thoughts because you all cover philanthropy. How much do you think about this particular idea that Sean raised? And then I do want to get to Ralph, who I know has just a few thoughts in reaction to some of Bill's comments.
Why you were thinking.
I agree that the individuals are absolutely what's going to be harnessed, and what's so exciting about some of the changes in technology, which is easier for people to work together and to see the responses to the daily crisis and how quickly that all happened in galvanized. I think we're going to see lots more of it, both good and bad, happening in response to this kind of disaster. So I absolutely think that's the reaction is. But I think it's often directed at, shall we say, the traditional charity and not at things like advocacy. And one thing that always strikes me covering this world is how little people get engaged. Not that they engage with government too much, but that they're much too scared and not dealing with those kinds of things. And that's in part because foundations don't finance that kind of thing in a very big way. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the implications of the Supreme Court decision are going to be, because a lot of people are saying, read it carefully, it's talking about nonprofits, not just about corporations. And that there may be more flexibility and more ability to engage with government and politics. And that's going to be a really nice lesson as far as that goes. So I would raise the question in some way, why don't nonprofits, both individual donors and nonprofits themselves, speak out more, and why don't we hear more from them on the policy issues?
Jim's right that Bill has this amazing, he's one of the smartest people I know, and he has this amazing ability to provoke me. By this sort of rhetorical excesses that he loves. Let me take not surprisingly different view. Actually, Bill and I tend to agree more than it seems. There is this palpable populism. We see it hear it, you can feel it. But what we've got to remember is this is really hardwired into the DNA of the nation. You know, revolting against big business and big government is what we do. And that's where we started. And every generation we do it. Calling institutions into the public square. Powerful institutions into the public square, whether it is the church into the public square, public officials into the public square, big business into the public square. So it's totally unsurprising that on occasion and periodically philanthropy will be called into the public square, because that is what we do. So I'm not one of the people who bemoan populism and see populism as some threat. The question is, does philanthropy have a particular role at moments when frustrated expectations combined with this sort of historical necessity to call people into the public square? Do we have an obligation to help to make sure that the conversation is informed? Do we have an obligation as philanthropy, because we think and talk about perpetuity, to take a long view and to help folks take a longer view than they might if when fueled by the passions of the moment? And I answer both of those questions, yes. Let me give you an example. At a licensed invitation, I had an opportunity to go to the attend and participate in the Philanthropy Roundtable's annual meeting in November of 2008. Now, at the time Adam extended the invitation, I was worried about, can I do it? If Adam asked me to do anything, I always do it. If he was asked me to do something during the week when we were doing the KC budget and whatnot, and Adam said, okay, we could do it on Saturday, November 9th. And I was pleased and all sorts of stuff. Now, I didn't realize that Saturday, November 9th was the Saturday after the first Tuesday in November, and therefore the Saturday after the election, and that when I went to the Philanthropy Roundtable, I would be attending a wake. I mean, that wasn't in my mind when I accepted the invitation, but a wake it was. And I think I don't know if Bill and I were, I think Bill may have been moderating the panel. And one of the participants of the panel, sensing the mood of the audience, and another very smart person got up and essentially began the presentation, walking perilously close, knowing the audience, to say that the economic crisis in the nation was a function of all these poor people who got loans to buy homes they could not afford. And that was essentially, we were facing a crisis and we had to find pretty simple explanation, and poor people were right up there next to big business as a likely suspect. And so, it's not often I admit to be the security law teacher, but, down in the audience of the folks, they're not with him. We could assume that that's what happened, or we could assume that the notion that we shouldn't have institutions too big to fail was led to a ban on interstate banking, and we repealed that, and now we have banks that are too big to fail. It may very well be that coming out of the Depression that we made a distinction between commercial banking and investment banking, understanding a differential approach to risk, and kind of what we call the Chinese wall between them, and we repealed that. And it may be that many of us are invested in derivatives and all sorts of products that we have no idea what they are. And with that bubble burst, we didn't know what would happen. So I kind of suggested that maybe the economic collapse had a hell of a lot more to do with that than it had to do with poor people getting housing. Even in that way, there was a sense that the issue was a little more complicated. So part of what we can do as philanthropy is not play to not just the popular sentiment, but the misinformation and disinformation. We can sort of try to figure out how we support opportunities and institutions and vehicles and means where people get the information they need to make a decision and to figure out about toward whom they should aim given their frustrated expectations. That's one thing. You know, we're the only sector that talks about perpetuity and think we talk about perpetuity and we argue about perpetuity. And we see 50 years past my death as being a real incursion of perpetuity. We are the only sector in the entire economy that can see 50 years past my death as being, my God, Bill Gates has abandoned the notion of perpetuity. Most of us are willing to talk about what happens up to my death, and maybe what happens a couple of months later on. But 50 years back, most people think that's beautiful. If we can think about perpetuity, then we can essentially create a public conversation that not only tells the truth about the present, but that looks to the future. Imagine if somebody had really gotten in and said, oh, wait a minute, let's not talk about death counts. Look at what happened last. Regardless of where you come down in the healthcare debate, you've got to admit that last summit did not do justice to any of the issues. There was a hell of a lot of heat and virtually no light. And, we in philanthropy, we could talk to something like that. And maybe in philanthropy, we can do the truth telling. And we could say something like, the consensus in Washington, whether we want to admit it or not, is that we should pass enormous deficits on to our children and grandchildren. One administration essentially financed 2 wars off the books and created a hell of a deficit. Its successor administration, to rescue the economy, is going to have to engage in virtually unprecedented government spending and will raise the deficit. In both cases, we will pass that on to our children. So maybe we could say, assuming we'll pass it on to the children, rather than pointing fingers, since we're both to blame, maybe we could talk about passing the deficit on, but also passing on value. Maybe we ought to say we should pass on a nation that is strong and secure, that we can pass on a nation where our children have clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. Maybe we could pass on a nation with an infrastructure with bridges not collapsing and tunnels not imploding and schools not falling down around the children who are attending it. Maybe we could pass on a nation where our children are in an educational system that allows them to develop their human capital, their skills and whatnot, so they can actually pay the deficit we're leaving them. Maybe we can pass on to our kids and grandkids a nation where we solve the problems in our generation, such as health care, and poverty, and not pass on both the debt and the problem. There is a way in which we can help to reframe an issue that invites you to look to the future. And if we do that, we can tap into the popular sentiment, because what we know is that popular sentiment isn't going to go away, it's going to recur. But what we know is we can challenge and refer and have people reframe it in such a way that people are thinking about their children and grandchildren and holding us all accountable for working with them as individuals and as groups in their local communities and their churches and synagogues to do better, to get different. I think that's what, when I see the populists out there, I see people who are concerned, confused, ill-informed, looking for answers, looking for leadership, and what they find is that we are sitting up here pointing fingers at each other. I think that philanthropy has a role in taking on and taking off the challenge of populism in our times and really seeing it as enormous energy and a genuine commitment to engage in finding solutions to the urgent problem. Bill and I don't disagree on this. We just come in from different points of view, and he's willing to take a shot and beat the hell out of some people who deserve it. But my sense is it doesn't matter if they deserve it. The question is how are we going to solve it.
Thank you, Ralph. And I'm going to open it up to the audience in a moment, so let me just make sure that their microphone's ready. And if you've got questions, I'm going to turn to you just in a minute. Let me ask one other sort of line of questioning, and that is really to bring in the perspective of a group that is not represented on this panel, and that is the grant seekers and partners that we work with in the philanthropic sector. And I want to pick up on a phrase that Bill used that we've actually heard on a number of occasions over the last 24 hours, and that's the whole notion of this obsession with metrics that we are seeing in philanthropy, which if you attend conferences of nonprofit leaders, you hear a lot about that and a lot of frustration with that kind of obsession on the part of the foundation. I'd love to hear any of you comment on sort of the perspective of the grant seeker as it relates to the issues we've been talking about.
I guess I would just say that a lot of the metric obsession, I believe, is a result of a shallow understanding of business metrics being applied kind of roughshod into philanthropy, and that business decisions, for investment decisions, are not based on simple quantitative metrics, right? Those are inputs into a very messy process of how business actually works. And I think the key thing for nonprofits and for philanthropy to allow this to happen is that good metrics are metrics designed by the grantee, right? That they're saying this is useful for us to run our organization, and that this is how we know we're doing a good job. I have a background in wealth management, and while there are certain standard metrics that investors want to see, for the most part, the companies are saying this is what we track, right? We're Comcast, we track ARPU, average revenue per unit. Well, Costco doesn't track ARPU, lots of other organizations don't track ARPU. So there's these standard metrics that are all designed by the company saying this is how we track our own performance, this is how we know that we're doing a good job. And so to the degree metrics are useful, I think that's the useful way that they're used. The grantees telling grant makers, this is how we know we're doing a good job. Unfortunately, I think that many nonprofits don't know we're doing a good job. They don't know how to track it or how to pay attention. That's the problem to solve, not for foundations or donors to impose standardized random metrics onto them.
Do foundations do a good job of describing how they know whether they're doing a good job?
I don't think that they really know either, but I think that the best way to describe it is to describe it through the actions of their grantees. That's my worldview on philanthropy, is that a great grant maker is one who supports organizations that end up doing great work, not one that says, we created this great idea and then executed it to a range of
I was struck last night, last night's panel, the discussion, amongst other things from a leading government personage, about the need for more metrics, the need for measurements, for data. The government has spent untold millions of dollars on measurements for the last, at least since the Great Society, social science became very much part of science. Philanthropy, from its very beginning, was designed to be much more based on measurement, metrics, definable outcomes. We've had a very long experience with this whole issue. And yet we can listen to a panel, right, that says we need more data. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, studies and data and all sorts of numerical tabulations are piling up on all the foundations represented. We've all got websites in which we're, piling up our studies. And yet, of course, none of this links up with each other. We're not building, we can figure out, bits and pieces, little tiny bits and pieces of the problem, but we're not building any kind of knowledge base. The panel later on that, it would be interesting to see how they address the problem. And before I leave, though, I do want to say one word to Ralph. 2 words to Ralph. Right, exactly. Yeah. Speaking of what philanthropy was from the beginning, philanthropy was from the beginning very institutional thing. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Russell Sagan was very much a movement designed to put public affairs in the hands of people who know better than everyday citizens. That was an essential piece of what they were doing. It was a piece of the progressive movement in America, which nowhere had a greater influence than in the state of California. It was very much at the forefront of that. And as a result of that, philanthropy has always had this attitude, as Ralph conveyed it, that people, when they talk about politics, tend to be, I think it was confused and ill-informed, were the words that Ralph used. That's the language, that's that kind of condescending language of the expert, who think that, that if only the American people really got the word, got the message that philanthropy can help deliver, they'll come to the right conclusions about it. They'll take the long view. They'll figure out that we do need this help after. It's that kind of condescension that really, really, really annoys people of the populist persuasion. I think we have to be very careful when we say the foundations have a role in helping people overcome their narrow prejudices and their narrow points of view to enter the enlightened uplands of expert professions. Oh, and one other thing. That was the one. I think I'm speaking for Adam when I say that the Philanthropy Roundtable does not blame for America's problem. The Philanthropy Roundtable is hard on figuring out ways to harness free enterprise systems, society, those elements to solve problems, to help overcome problems. So, a comment from the audience is absolutely not the spirit.
Ralph, I will give you one word, and then I will go to the audience.
Because my word is longest. Let me be fair to the second point that as Bill knows this and Adam does. I was talking about a particular speaker who actually diverted. I think I was. The speaker who diverted from the topic an issue to personally to offer his conjecture as to what was going on. That was not. I think Adam would say that was not. Did not represent the views of the Philanthropy Roundtable. It was absolutely correct. I was talking about a particular speaker who was speaking for the audience. And since the speaker is my friend, you can't ever repeat. I said anything here. This is that's what. And Bill, let me just say that the first point you put was really was well taken, but with the customary mistake that you lost. Let me be brief. I do think that there is an obligation to provide information. I do think that much of public conversation is ill-informed, and that's not about the populist conversation. That's much about public conversation. Most of us in this room heard the reports of the financial collapse. And if we were to take a poll in this room and say, how many of us can explain what a derivative is? This is not a populist question. This is in this room. We would have less than a half dozen people stand up, raise their hand, and a half dozen of you, once you stand in the back, so the rest of us can come over and learn about it. We have enormously important issues in this country about which we all are ill-informed. And part of what we can do is to spark a public conversation by producing more information. And what we do is try to get the data, turn the data into information, turn the information into knowledge. That's an important role of philanthropy, and it's not a fair comment to say that because I think we all need information, it's some condescending to people who view themselves as the populist movement. I think this is a conversation in which we all need to be engaged, and we have to know and making sure we're all better informed than we are.
Very, very quick. I think Ralph said something right on key to the future of philanthropy, which is information. Philanthropy understanding that information as influence is the key. That foundations, they don't have much money. They really don't. It's a small amount of money compared to even individual donors, let alone the grand economy. And that is the key. And that humans are pattern recognition animals, right? We read information. We're always going to evaluate. It's missing evaluations. It's missing human nature. We're not data crunchers. We're not computers. We don't need to run things based on numerical number crunching. But we do need information. And philanthropy has a fantastic opportunity to provide the robust information that society needs. Excellent point, Sean. Let's go to the audience. Dan, in the back.
Dan Siegel with Youth Give. And my question goes to Ralph and Bill. Both talked about how the organized, so-called organized philanthropy world of foundations, that 50% is disaggregated in terms of information investment, but this 85%, the individual donor that Sean talked about and Stacy, is becoming more and more aggregated in terms of ways to pool micro donations and build knowledge and mobilize action. So my question goes to, for that 15% of the foundation world of philanthropy, how might it need to change to support this new, more increasingly organized world of the individual donor to act as a broader field?
What do you think the answer is? I mean, I'm not being, what do you think?
Well, I just observed that, the organized philanthropy field doesn't put much strategic investment into that 85%, becoming increasingly a knowledge aggregator and active with the individual donor, some of the things that touch on populism, but there's not really a strategic investment across the foundation world to say, our role is to leverage up this 85%. It's not just to act as individual bid players, but to look at really the big part of the pie can be strategically elevated if we act together to really look at what philanthropy is. Philanthropy is often talked about from that 15% side, but not really in terms of investing for the big part of philanthropy.
Thank you, Dan. Let's look at Haiti as an example for the opportunity that philanthropy, that foundations have for this exact question. So I thought that the remarkable issue for philanthropy after the Haitian earthquake was the way in which the message in the media was not just give, but to give well, right? So President Bush and Clinton came out and had their fundraiser, but one of the key things was President Bush didn't just say just give. He said don't give in kindness. And instructed people how not to give, right? That wasn't happening after the future. And so within organized philanthropy, people know where to give to help Haiti, right? I mean, Ford Foundation came out 4 days later with gifts to Oxfam and Partners in Health. The Hewlett Foundation came out like 7 days later and interestingly gave to Planned Parenthood and gave a short explanation for why. We know how to help Haiti, but everyday Americans don't, right? $10 check right across stuff. But it was like, what, $400 million that those individuals gave. And I can't understand why leaders in philanthropy were not on the nightly news regularly saying, we know how to help in Haiti. Here's what you do. We've done this before. We don't know how to fix the solution forever, but we've gone through lots of disasters. We've got a lot of staff. We've got a lot of money doing this. And they could have leveraged $400 million over the course of like a week and a half and directed it to organizations that were going to sustain Haiti over the long term and really help them make it. And we just missed that opportunity.
And it's not just about money, but about volunteers. How many foundations give money to support effective volunteerism? It's not, wouldn't take that much money, but that's the kind of thing that we see this incredible spirit of volunteerism. We see AmeriCorps growing, but it's very hard to keep those things in a sustained way. And people just don't. It's not sexy enough. It's not the union thing. Like it needs to be content to be able to really make all these people much more effective in their community.
This is a good example of sort of measuring the timeline of what's horizon on the Haiti issue. I'm not sure that our role, because talk about a small number of foundations, was could have been getting out there. I think most of us tried to identify who are the relief organizations, who are the organizations in the front line, and try to support them. But I hadn't really thought about the fact that we could have, we tried to do it outside because outside began to, collect cans. And one good was to forget collecting cans and cash. But I think here's what we're struggling with as a foundation. Once we get over the enormity of this tragedy, in Haiti, you're going to have the largest economic development effort ever in the history of that country in the foreseeable future. The challenge is going to be how much of that economic development is going to resolve to the benefit of the people who were in desperate trouble the day before the earthquake. And so for us, what we're struggling with and really engagement is what can we do about what we know, what we've learned from engaging in economic development in this country to say what will it take to make sure that the folks who live work, worship, raise their kids, and who were poor like hell the day before the earthquake, that they benefit from this economic development effort? Or what does it mean? How can you benefit from a country that has no workforce development system and where there's a 71% literacy rate? You know, those are the issues that we're struggling right now. It feels to me that those are the appropriate issues for philanthropy to struggle with and think about the long term, and to some extent, do what we're about. Send cash, get out of the way of the people who can do the work, who can provide the immediate relief, and try to figure out how to reach it. So that's how we're looking at it, and I'm not sure that we thought about it in the way you said that maybe we could have done more. We didn't think about it.
But even just that message would have been incredibly important with the American public to hear, right? So many donors, some of the kind of most informed individual donors are saying, great, I figured out Partners in Health are great, this is what I should be giving to. I'll earmark it only to be used in Haiti, only for disaster relief, right? Really bad thing to do from a donor's perspective because of these issues that you're pointing. And so for there to be messages going out to the public saying, it's not that simple. Yeah, it seems intuitive that you want to help in Haiti, so earmark it just for Haiti. But the people in this room know that's not the best way to support because these can have these long-term issues. And there's not a lot of people well-positioned to spread that message. The New York Times ran 2 articles in the week after the earthquake talking about, disaster relief, problems within kind of donations, all of these various issues, and not a single person from the foundation was quoted in either of them. For the most part, the quotes were from people who were independent consultants who had a blog, right? All these people who, in many respects, are probably underqualified compared to people who work at Gates, Ford, Hewlett, Casey. And yet, what they were doing effectively is spreading their message. And for the most part, they got it right. I think that the New York Times article got the message right, but they had to go to the people who were sharing information with them. And they couldn't go to Hewlett or Ford, who made grants, who had thought about these issues, but who put out press releases that just had this is where it's going, not more comprehensive conversation about it.
Mindful of time, and my apologies to the audience if we're not going to have time for more questions because I want to keep us on track. Let me conclude with a final question to each of you and ask you to be relatively brief, perhaps not using Bill Schomburg's definition of 1 or 2 words, but slightly brief if you could. And we'll start with Bill and work our way down. And I think the question is in the spirit of leaving us all with sort of a tangible takeaway, something for us. These conversations can often be quite, quite big picture, and it'd be nice to make it specific. What do you each see as 1 or 2 key competencies for foundations, given this environment, given the era that we're in today, given what you've all talked about, what we heard yesterday, challenging times, big changes, the need for adaptability? What are the 1 or 2 competencies that you think are going to be really important for individual foundations or organized philanthropy in this era? Bill, let me start with you.
Well, going back to some of my original comments, I think that the incredible energy, inventiveness, and responsiveness of the civil society sector is an incredible asset. And philanthropy can either help nourish that or it can Bigfoot. And I'm afraid that by and large it tends to Bigfoot. Just tying into this last conversation about relief and aid and recovery. I think we have to be very clear when we say to the American people, I know your initial impulse is to do X, but the people who know better want you to do Y. I'm not saying that that isn't necessary sometimes. I'm just saying we need to be very careful because you are in fact speaking to the heart of the American civic sector that relies on that initial incredibly human impulse to be helpful. And we need to nourish that rather than to suppress it.
Great, thank you, Bill. Sean?
I think it's communication management, right, for foundations or philanthropic institutions to recognize that your communication staff is not this kind of add-on where you can hire anybody from any sector who just kind of put out press releases. The communication staff is potentially the biggest, the people who have the most impact, right? They're the people who can transform the grants or the work that your philanthropic institution do into information and knowledge that is leveraged by a lot of other people. I think that's the key group. And historically, the communication staff in philanthropy it's like they're just outbound people, right? Here's what happened. Here's we're answering questions if you have press something. But there's communication strategies waiting out there for philanthropy to really come.
I'm going to say communications too, but I'm going to mean it in a couple of additional ways from what Sean said. First is communication with the grantees themselves. I mean, you look at some of the studies that Center for Effective Philanthropy has done, and most grantees don't think that foundations have done a very good job of responding to the economic crisis or helping them through it. And yet, I bet most of the people in this room think that they've been working really, really hard to help their grantees get through the economic crisis. There's a disconnect there because people aren't talking to each other in very good ways. And we need to figure out what's going on here. One of the things I think that's been most distressing to me in the world of philanthropy, since we've been covering it, is still the unwillingness of most grantees to feel comfortable talking out about the good hard issues because they're very afraid that they're being punished for it. We've got to change that culture. It's changing a little bit, but it still needs to be changing more than that way. Foundations need to be the ones that help make this happen because they are the ones that happen in these kind of ways to encourage it. My other concern about the way foundations need to think about communication is related to field journalism and how it is changing in such a significant way. We've seen lots of interesting experiments in these past couple of years with foundations financing journalism, but that's going to need to continue because it's not just about data and information, but it's about telling the stories and helping people understand, doing the investigative, the watchdog work, and that sort of thing. Foundations don't play a role in revival journalism, and I don't think it's going to serve our democracy well at all, and it's going to be very important that we work this through. And I think it comes through all parts of the foundations to be concerned about, not just the communication staff, not just the foundations to deal with journalism, but everybody.
I would have felt a lot better if you said you started with Bill and working your way up. A whole lot better about that. Bill will get me back for all this. Two things. One, I think, most of us who are in philanthropy either clearly didn't go to kindergarten because we never really learned to play well with others. And I think that as we look at the challenges ahead of us and the opportunities, we're going to have to learn to cooperate and collaborate in ways we have not in the past. And with each other, with government, with business, and with our nonprofit partners. That's a skill that's we're going to have to practice, develop, and perfect if we're going to be effective in the decade.
Great. And the thought I would simply add to these very thoughtful observations on the competencies is just not forgetting our value as public service institutions and what we are here to do, the enormous privilege associated with that, the humility with which we need to approach it. And I think if we do all of these things in that spirit, it hopefully will bode well for the future of our sector. I want to ask all of you to join me in thanking this outstanding group of panelists.
And thank you, Jim, for moderating that interesting conversation, which provides a lot of nourishment for thought and hopefully stimulates us for the rest of the day. The breakout sessions are on the second floor. I don't know if there's still some coffee back there, but get a cup of coffee and wander upstairs for the session of your choice. Thank you.
Yeah,